I'm doing something quite unusual today, which is instead of waking up this morning and going for a run, I've started thinking about how I would autopilot in my life, do things continuously, and whether it's healthy, it's correct for that to actually continue. In order to explain what I'm talking about, I think I need to go back into my history of running. One thing that's worth sharing is that I never grew up a runner or athletic in any way. Even though over the last 2 years I've run 5 marathons, 2 half marathons, have logged God knows how many kilometers a month, a year, and I've gone really deep into the running cult. I didn't grow up this way. I still remember back in high school being mostly a straight A student, except for physical education, PE class. That was the dreaded class for me. I was fat. I couldn't run 6 laps around the school track. Our PE teacher used to grade us on a bell curve. He would let us all go for a run. The first 3 people to finish a 10-kilometer run would get an A. The next couple of people, a B, C plus, C, and so forth. And so I always found myself at the end of the pack. I just didn't have any athleticism. I didn't know what it meant to run any sort of distance. It was hard all around. Fast forward to graduating from high school, entering the first year of university back in Canada. And I decided I was going to make something of myself. I was going to start running to lose weight, to gain self confidence, and to try to get a girlfriend for the first time. So I worked on that. This might have been the early 2000s. I think I ran a 10-kilometer race. It was called the Vancouver Sun Run because it was sponsored by our local newspaper in Vancouver, the Vancouver Sun, hence Sun Run. And I did that for a few years. I don't even remember the times that I had. This is way before I had any concept of pace or wearing a watch or times or any of that. I was just running to burn off calories, or so I thought. A few years later, I might have been in my mid 20s. I was already working. I had a relationship. I had a girlfriend. Was still kind of chubby, kind of fat, but I was whipping myself into better shape. I was feeling better about myself. There was a chance to run a half marathon. At the time, 21 kilometers or 21.1 kilometers felt insurmountable. I think my first half marathon took me about 3 hours to run. It was grueling, but I don't know why. I enjoyed that to some extent. And I still remember the first half marathon. Everything was wrong, just the breathing, the technique, the form. I still remember having sort of a clenched jaw in the last half of the race, and I had this jaw discomfort that stayed with me for a few days afterwards. I was so tense, and yet for some reason I kept going back to that. Always just kind of running without any concept of pace or speed, just wanting to complete these races. Every time it was about just finishing. I moved to China in 2012, but I had these opportunities to take business trips to California. That was a real privilege because every time I went back to California, it would be excellent weather, so it would be great for running, even though I wasn't running as consistently as I am doing now. And almost every weekend, without fail, you could find a half marathon or a 10K race in California. And so I remember every time I went to California, I would sign up for a half marathon race and I would run it and I would enjoy it. And I had no concept as to my finishing time. I must have run a dozen of these races over a couple of years, but I had no idea what shoes I was wearing, how fast I was going. None of this was tracked in an app or in a watch somewhere. So you could say that all of these results or these experiences were lost in time. That was the unquantified self. So I've always had this relationship with running, but it was always just an extension of me. It was not intrinsically me. I had other things to focus on. I went ahead and I wrote 2 books. I focused on my job. I focused on having a better relationship with people in my life. I did not let running consume me. But I also knew something about myself, which is that I have an obsessive personality. At any point in time, I'm always going to need some sort of meaningful project to sink my hands in. As I mentioned, it's changed over the years. Sometimes it was writing a book. Sometimes it was climbing the career ladder. Other times it was building the startup. And there was a long period of 8 or 9 years where I was focused on building a podcast, an interview podcast, and seeing how far that could go. In recent years, it turned into a YouTube obsession or social media obsession, not using social media, but how to create content for social media. Just trying to acquire this knowledge, trying to apply it, and trying to put it out there into the world, trying to be a creator or a builder. And then there was a flashpoint. Starting from 2019 or 2020, COVID hit the world and COVID hit China. I found myself with more time indoors, let's put it that way. I still remember living in Shanghai during this time. Where I am now, I'm still here in Shanghai. Feeling that freedom, that exhilaration of getting outside, going for runs, sometimes with the mask on, which is a kind of a funny period thinking about all of that, but that's perhaps a digression for another time. Sort of rediscovering my love for running. Just being able to go out there for hours at a time and be with myself and my own thoughts, my own brain activity. I was still very much a casual runner. No thought as to running anything like a full marathon distance. A few times I might have challenged myself to run a little bit more than half marathon distance, maybe 25 kilometers or 30 kilometers. I don't even remember exactly what caused this. You have to understand too that I did all of these things solo. One thing I loved about running, and I still love about running today, is that you don't have to make plans with other people to run. You just go outside and run. For 99.9% of my entire life, I've always run alone. It certainly has its ups and downs. There's no one to guide you. There's no one to coach you, to instruct you, to give you meaningful tips. There's no one to chat with. But I always had the music in my ears, or a podcast I was listening to, or an audiobook. There was always some way to be by myself, but still fulfilled. And fast forward a few years later, 2023, I was in a job that I didn't exactly enjoy. It was stressful. It was painful. There were times when I asked myself, is this really what I want to do for my career? I kind of just started using running as a way to, and I had been inactive for running for a while. I was starting to gain a little weight and I was starting to lose a bit of that self-esteem or maintenance that I'd tried to maintain over the years. And I just thought one day in 2023, let's just start running again. Let's just try to get those morning runs in before going into work. It was a way to create autonomy. It was a way to create agency. It was a way to feel like I was getting back some semblance of control in my life. And so that's what I did. I am a fairly goal-oriented person. I've been living my life according to not necessarily needing to achieve goals, but the process of getting there. And that was it. I felt like I wanted to train. I wanted to get back into running, but I needed to anchor it around a goal. And so I decided to take the plunge. This is all just from myself. It didn't come from anybody. It didn't come from being in any kind of running group or social peer pressure, nothing like that. I just decided in 2023 I was going to cross off one of the bucket list items and run a full marathon. This was in Suzhou, so it wasn't too far away from Shanghai. I didn't sign up with anybody else. I didn't plan to go with anybody else. I just went on my own. And I still remember that day of the marathon, just feeling that combination of trepidation and excitement. Excitement at the possibility that I was going to push myself to a new limit, a new distance, a new completion, but also trepidation at the pain. And I didn't really have a systematic training plan or anything like that. I just knew intellectually that if I ran more and I refueled better during the race, I could probably finish the race. Just like in all the years that I've been running, it was never about a finish time. It was just about finishing, just about completing the race. And I had my share of health scares over the years. I've had points in time where I felt like I overexerted myself, and I also wanted, paradoxically, to finish it. I wanted to finish it, but I also didn't want to kill myself. Didn't want to kill myself literally, but I didn't want to kill myself on a metaphorical level either. The last 10 kilometers of the race, a lot of marathon runners know, from 32 to 42 kilometers, that is when the marathon really begins. That's when you really start to feel it. That's when your brain starts to ask you, James, why are you running this kind of distance? Why don't you just stop? All of these questions and doubts, they started to sink in. Not to mention that day in Suzhou, it was extremely, excruciatingly hot. The last 10 kilometers, there was no shade or reprieve whatsoever. I actually thought at several points in the run that I was going to pass out from heat stroke. Not to mention I was completely just unready. My legs started cramping up at 30 kilometers. It was through a combination of the cramps, being not ready in a physical sense, but also this mental trepidation that I walked the last 10 kilometers. So I ended up finishing the marathon. This is when I started to pay attention to things like finishing times. It took about 5.5 hours. The last hour was just walking. It was tough. It was excruciating. And I checked something off the bucket list, which is, hey, I finished a half marathon. But somehow my mind wanted more. So over the next 1 to 2 years, ended up running more marathons, finally getting a watch, finally getting on a training plan, running a few more marathons since then, getting a little faster, feeling that excitement of getting faster in your 40s. Like, hey, maybe there's more to this. Maybe I have not peaked athletically as a runner. Those were all very exciting things that came into play. In 2024, I ran 3 marathons, getting faster every single time, but also dealing with a lot of things that runners deal with, which is the reality. If you're just running for fitness, you're running for maintenance, there's no reason to log the distances that I did. I tracked my running, and I think I ran 2,700 kilometers in 2024, because it's sort of a axiom or a principle that the more you run, the better you get at running, even slow mileage. And last year I got this watch, so I started tracking my times. I started to think about, well, what's the pace I'm running at? I started to see those improvements, but in order to have those improvements, you also need to pay more attention to the numbers. And when you pay more attention to the numbers, it also takes a little bit of the joy and initial innocence out of running that I've been just coasting and cruising by for the last 20 years. It's like a lot of things. You can enjoy it on an amateur or casual level your whole life. You can enjoy watching basketball and just watching grown men and women put the ball in the basket. Or you can decide to go deeper. You can decide to understand the strategy behind the games, why certain players are standing at different parts of the court. I'm using this analogy because that's also what kind of happened to me as a basketball fan is you get more hardcore into it. But is it really better? Is it really better to understand everything that's going on? On the surface level, yes, it is better. Knowledge, it's good. But I also feel that for running, I've opened up the Pandora's box. And it's very hard to go back to that initial innocence of running just because I felt like it. Running without a time. Running without subconsciously comparing myself to others because now I am in these running groups and we do compare. And I know intellectually I shouldn't. Another runner is completely different from me. There's always going to be faster people, there's always going to be slower people. But the part of me that thought I was fine with who I was as a runner, and the part of me now that thinks I can do more, I can achieve more, I can run a faster marathon, I can run an ultra marathon, which is a distance that is beyond 42 kilometers. How much of that is really coming from within, and how much of that is due to societal or group influence? Now, you could say that no man or woman is an island. It's true. We live in a society, and it is kind of fun sometimes to have this competitive element of it, or at least a competitive element with myself. But it does make me wonder. And that is why I'm sitting here on a morning deciding to reflect a little bit instead of going out autopiloting on yet another run. Truth be told, I'll probably end up running later today anyways. At this point in my life, it's almost harder not to run than it is to run. But I do have to check myself. I do have to be aware of that. Question, how much of my identity now is tied to being a runner? How much of my happiness is due to running? I'm proud to be a runner. I'm proud to have done the things that I've done. They say that only less than 1% of the world has ever run a marathon. I've run 5. The question now is that enough? The other question is, as things start to ramp up in other parts of my life, how am I going to balance the running with everything else? Am I going to continue to seek the competitive aspect? And I know that it's a tough road. Hell, I've gotten injured in recent months because I was trying to go faster and faster. So it was also very humbling in that sense. Or do I remove myself from running? Go back to where I was 20 years ago. Just a fat kid wanting to run a little bit to feel better, feel good. Or myself from 10 years ago, just running when I'm on a business trip, not looking at the time. If I have a watch now, maybe throwing it away. And just running for the enjoyment of it. I'm not sure what I will evolve into as a runner. I'm not even sure if runner is a good label to have for myself. Am I a runner or am I just James?